Welcome to UID 2021. I'd like to introduce Sarah West, Education and Convention Director for the Petroleum Equipment Institute, who's been a longstanding member of AEA, the Association Education Alliance. Sarah will do our formal welcome. Sarah is AEA's UID 2022 Program Chair. Sarah?
Thanks, Joanna. It's good to be here. On behalf of the Association Education Alliance, it's my pleasure to open UID 2021. We are welcoming more than 300 participants to the program this year and are simply delighted to keep the spirit of UID alive, even in these uncertain times. Over the next 3 afternoons, you have the opportunity to participate in presentations facilitated by individuals who know distribution and are the best in their disciplines. But first up, we have a few announcements. This morning, you should have received the first of our daily welcome emails. We hope that you find the updates helpful. Also, we want your help customizing the closing program on Wednesday. It is a panel featuring Mary Kelly, Mike Marks, and Paul Riley. They will share their perspectives on developing your own brand of currency to help you remain productive and successful in tough times. Dirk Beveridge will be the moderator. Please submit questions for the panel's consideration. Simply click on Community and scroll down to Questions for the Panel. We will share your questions with the panel in advance. Next is a message you'll hear throughout the program because it is so important. After each session, please take a few minutes to complete the feedback form. Your opinion is extremely important to our instructors and also to us as we do programming for the future. If you are an all-access registrant and participate live in at least one session each day, you will receive a certificate of completion awarding you 3 hours of CEU. If you are a one-day pass participant and attend at least one session on that day, you will receive a certificate of completion for 1 hour of CEU. This CEU can be applied to fulfill the requirements for the Purdue University Certificate of Innovative Distribution. Your real-time participation is imperative. Next, be sure to join us on social media for the photo contest. Click the photo icon on the HUVA homepage to enter. Upload an image of yourself or your team participating in the program. Upload as many photos as you like, and don't forget to like your favorite. The photo with the most likes by midnight, March 17, will be featured on UID Social. Beginning next Monday, session recordings will be available through HUVA. All access pass registrants will have access to all session recordings. One-day pass registrants will have access to the recordings for the sessions you registered to attend. Recordings will be available through April 19, 2021. The link to each session block will open 5 minutes before the start time. All sessions will be 50 minutes with time allocated for Q&A. Please enter questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Any questions that we don't have time to answer will be shared with instructors for follow-up. Responses will be posted within a day or two in your agenda under the handouts. As a reminder, course materials are for personal use only. So let's get started on day one. Welcome to our opening session, Leaders Are Not Born, They Are Built. Our presenter is Randy Disharoon, one of my favorite presenters ever. He has an extensive background in both industrial distribution and manufacturing. And as a sidebar, he was a nuclear engineer at the young age of 23. He holds a BS in engineering and 2 master's degrees, including an MBA. He's currently pursuing his doctorate in strategic leadership. So help us welcome Randy.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And while I'm doing that, I also want to thank the UID team for putting on this event virtually. Can everybody see my screen? I think so. Okay, good. Well, let's go ahead and get started. The learning objectives for today, and I just want to bring this out to begin. This is about leadership, and leadership is, in a word, influence, positive influence on the performance of others as well as on the performance of the entire team. And so I want you to imagine with me today that you are 27 years old and that you have just accepted a job offer as a branch manager in the chemical industry. And you go for your first day to be introduced to the team at the branch. There are 35 people at this branch. There's a customer service team up front. There's a warehouse team. There's a tank farm with 26 tanks containing liquid chemicals. There's also a rail car system where they bring in soda ash from the middle section of Georgia. Now let's remember that you're 27 years old. The demographics at the branch are such that they range in age from 19 all the way to 65. They come from every background, educational and otherwise, and you are now the branch manager. You find out very early on that they don't get along. The customer care team really is not in sync with the warehouse team. The warehouse team really hates the fact that sales always promises more than they can deliver. The tank farm team and the sales team also don't get along too well. And so you're walking into this as 27-year-old brand new leader. And your job is not only to assemble and congeal this team, but to add even more to the complexity of the position. You learn that, in fact, this branch is the largest branch in the entire company, and yet it hasn't turned a profit in over 10 years. Your job is to be the turnaround artist. And so today, when you imagine yourself in that role, I want us to remember that there are some key building blocks that I've learned over the years and that many leaders who I've poured my life into have taught me. And so I want to share some of that with you today. So it's really 4 phases: build within, build around, build up, and then build out. And so with that, I want us to first ask the question, are we born to be a leader? Or are we built to be a leader? In my doctoral studies, we looked at the great man theory, how everything coalesces around a charismatic leader. And then that was kind of supplanted by situational or behavioral leadership. But in the last 10 to 20 years, leadership styles such as transformational leadership, servant leadership, and even adaptive leadership, which of course this past year, adaptive leadership has been front and center. And I guess my question to you today is this: did you use this last year as an opportunity as a leader or as an individual contributor to kind of get ahead instead of just keeping up? Did you get ahead of the competition by being creative in how you adapted to these external forces? And so the question before us today is, are you born or are you built? Well, Warren Bennis, a noted leadership expert, is quoted as saying the most dangerous leadership myth is that leaders are born, that there is a genetic factor to leadership. He says that is nonsense. In fact, the opposite is true. Leaders are made rather than born. So this morning, or this afternoon, or wherever you are, I've got great news. You can develop and be a great leader, whether you've been in leadership for some time now, or whether you have just taken your first leadership role, Or maybe you're not even a leader yet. There's work that you can do to pave your way to great leadership development. And so today we're going to do that. So the first 4 phases are this: build within, build around, build up, and then build out. Okay, it's very simple. We're going to start with building within. How do you develop yourself and implement certain skills and training in order to be a great leader? Well, I would say that it's really 4 keys to doing that. Number 1, you got to think. Number 2, you have to write down. Note that I said write down your leadership goals. Number 3, you have to develop good leadership habits. And then number 4, you have to build your brand. Okay, so we'll walk through one at a time here, and we'll discuss how we are able to employ that particular key in developing ourselves as a leader. Number 1, you have to think. You know, the pace of life and the stress of being in a leadership role, the number of emails that you get every day, the number of phone calls, the number of meetings, virtual meetings have gone through the roof for most of us this past year. And so a lot of us have been found kind of reacting to the schedules that are imposed on us instead of being proactive. And I would argue that one of the lost arts of any great leadership development method is to just think. What am I passionate about? What am I good at? What are my competencies? How am I perceived by my coworkers and my colleagues and even my leadership above me? How am I perceived by my customers or my clients? And what is my ultimate purpose? Who am I designed to be? And so as you think about those things, that kind of feeds the next phase, which is really to write down your leadership goals. Okay, and understand that when you write them down, it has a direct impact on your ability to actually accomplish them. In fact, in 1953, Yale University did a study where they followed the graduates of the 53 graduating class. And what they determined is that only 3% of that graduating class had taken the time to write down their goals. Well, after 20 years, they followed up with each one of those graduates from that class of 1953, and they discovered a startling statistic. The 3% that had written down their goals had accumulated more success and wealth than the other 97% combined. Now, I don't know about you, but that is an amazing statistic. And so my encouragement to you is this: take the opportunity, if you haven't done so, to write down your goals. There's something about using your arm to write them down so that somehow or another it is a direct, like a hardwire into your brain, and then go ahead and tell people, this is what I'm going to achieve. This is what I'm going to go after over this next year. And so let's pause right now and think about what that means. Think with me, 1 year from today, March the 15th, 2022. Where will you be? Imagine yourself. What type of a role will you be in? Will you be in the same role? If so, what specific leadership traits do you want to develop this year and hone so that next year you can say, I've made progress in this area? It could be that you're more accountable. It could be that you are more inspiring to the team that you're leading. It could be that you haven't yet identified somebody to succeed you so that you can move on. And so maybe that's the goal that you're going to try to accomplish this next year. Whatever it is, write it down. Okay. And so I've included with the WOVA app a goal setting worksheet. And so you can just use that as a way to kind of keep yourself accountable to do this important exercise. So you have the thinking, taking time to think even in the midst of a busy schedule, putting that phone away and spending time thinking about your career and your goals, and then writing those goals down is number 2. But number 3 is really important, and it's to develop good habits. You know, some experts say that it takes at least 90 days of continuous repetition of a particular habit in order for it to stick, in order for it to be permanent in your life. This is true in sports. This is true in music. This is true, yeah, in business. You have habits. Some of us have bad habits, and some of us have good habits that we need to double down on and make sure we accentuate them in our daily operations and the way in which we interact with people. So what kinds of habits should a leader develop? I think the first and foremost one is that you should commit to excellence. Really don't settle for just being okay or passing the test. Take time to be the very best you can be. Number 2, and this is something that I've learned over the last year especially, block your time. What do I mean by that? We all have schedules, either online, you know, in Outlook or what have you, or you have it on your desk. Some of you still keep a physical calendar. I would argue that if you block your time for personal development, for thinking, for goal setting, for evaluating how this past week went, for setting time to schedule your next week, and really stick to that. I will even take it a step further beyond work. You know, block your time for exercise, block your time for sleep, block your time to put your phone away and don't let it control you. Let yourself be free from all of that push notification world that we live in, right? And when you do, you're able to then focus in on the actual activities that are going to advance you toward your goals. So develop those habits. Another thing that I've learned in this last year is when you're addressing your team, 2 things in 2 minutes. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but it's a way for you to take just 2 minutes and keep your team kind of focused on what you're trying to drive them to accomplish. It can happen every day. It can happen once a week, every other day, whatever that cadence is that's right for you. I would encourage you to take the opportunity and make that happen. So you've got to set your goals, okay? You got to think, right? Think, set your goals, and then thirdly, develop those good habits as a leader. And then lastly, you want to build your brand. What does it mean to build your brand? The fact is, you are a brand where you are located in your company. People have a perception about you. You have a certain image. And so your goal should be to build your brand. How are you perceived by your coworkers, by your team? How do they see you as a leader? And it's okay to ask them, you know, just be honest. Say, how am I perceived? They'll be honest with you as long as you don't use it in a way to kind of, kind of get back at them. The point is, always be learning, always be growing in your role. I would argue that 27-year-old, first job, first time leading 35 people in a branch, none of which get along, you know, your job is to really spend a lot of time listening, a lot of time out on the floor, a lot of time with the people. We call this effectively management by walking around. You learn a lot when you get out of your office, when you get out of this time when you're in your cocoon. Real leadership is getting out and having those honest conversations. I was mentoring a young man recently, and he really struggled with this. He felt like, you know what, when they see me, they think that, you know, I'm just there to kind of look over their shoulder. I told him that's not true, especially if after the first couple of weeks, they now sense that you're really interested in them. You want to know what they did over the weekend. You want to know what their dreams are, their goals are, their struggles are. What's the obstacles? What are the obstacles that are in their way? When you build that kind of rapport with your team, you're building your brand. The other thing I would say when building your brand is to list your strengths and weaknesses, to then get a couple of people to share with you what your blind spots are, okay? Because we all have them. You know what my blind spot was? When I was a younger leader, I wanted everybody to like me. I mean, I would think that's a good thing until a good friend of mine told me, you know, Randy, when you want everybody to like you, there are times when you actually will act in ways that is not in the best interests of the larger team, because you're not holding people accountable, because if you hold them accountable, they may not like you. And so therefore there's this real blind spot that I had to learn to get over. And you know, I didn't even see it in myself. I had someone else tell me. So my question to you is, what is your blind spot? What are the ways in which you can kind of identify those areas where you need to improve? The third thing I would say is build that roadmap of success for yourself. Okay, where are you going to be a year from now? Okay, is it in another role? If so, what does that role look like? And then what are the mileposts that lead you back to today? Okay, and then lastly, you really want to tackle the tough assignments. Whenever your leadership comes down and says, we have a project that is going to be a bear of a project. You know how to build your brand with upper management? You go ahead and raise your hand and say, I'll take that one on. You know, challenging projects really show the mark of a person and their willingness to take on the tough assignments. That really builds your brand. So with that, that's how you build yourself. That's phase one, building within, building your capacity for leadership. So now let's go to phase two, because now some of you may have a team now. It could be anywhere from 4, you know, a team really by definition is if you have 2 direct reports, that's a team, you know, and you could have 100 people in your company. Maybe you run a company, maybe you run a sales force that has 10, 12, 50 people. Whatever it is, you have to get the right team around you. And we're going to talk about the 4 puzzle pieces to assembling the dream team, if you will. The first one is you got to recruit. There's a good chance that everybody on this call has either been in a season where they have had to hire onto their team, or they're in a season where they are currently having to hire, or they're coming out of a season where they just hired somebody and they're trying to figure out if it was the right decision. Okay, so recruiting is a lifelong experience and responsibility for leaders. Number 2, you have to match them. What I mean by that is get them in the right position. Not everybody is suited for every single different role. You don't always have the utility man on your team. You have to find the right position for each person on your team. And then number 3, you have to empower them. This is an often overused word, but I would argue it's still valid. It's still important. And we'll talk about how to empower your team. And then finally, how to guide your team. Your job as a leader is to drive home the idea that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. And so let's walk through those one at a time, okay? Number 1, you want to recruit strategically. Notice strategically. Now, this is all based on a statistic that is startling. 33% of the US workforce is not even engaged in their job. That means if you have 9 direct reports, there's a good chance that 3 of them are totally disengaged from what you're trying to accomplish. You have to identify them. Your job as a leader is to constantly assess your team and determine who needs to be on my team and how can I support them, train them, empower them, give them incentives to be able to grow as a person who's contributing to the team. Okay, so here are 5 keys to strategic recruitment. Number 1, network. Network internal to your company as well as external. You know the best network venues or means that you can identify great talent? Look at some of your top employees on your team or in your company and find out, do they have friends in the industry? Do they have friends who would be who are interested in a career change? Because good, solid, high work ethic people hang around good, solid, high work ethic people. And so network to find the best talent. Number 2, you want to recruit for the long term and not just to fill the job. Let me just say this. This is a cardinal sin among leaders. They will have an opening that comes out and they have to fill it. They have got so much pressure to get somebody into the role that they will settle and they will put somebody in that they think might work out. And then they find out it's just not happening. And then guess what? You spend most of your time kind of recovering from that rash decision that you've made. So always recruit for the long term. Does this person have a lot of runway? Are they trainable? Are they humble? Are they coachable? Will they be able to adapt and learn new skills and new talents? Will they work with the team, or are they kind of this lone ranger kind of person? At the end of the day, your job in recruitment is to find people that are going to be a long-term fit for your organization. You ask any HR person in the industry, in UID, and they'll tell you that turnover is one of the most costly aspects of the business. And so your job as a leader is to have as little turnover as possible. Number 3, the best way to get best recruits is to cast a vision. Cast a compelling vision about where you are going. This has always been true, but I will tell you, over the last 5 or 10 years, as millennials have entered into the workforce with such great volume, they are all wanting to work for companies that are going to make a difference. And vision really is a way to connect them to how your company is going to make a difference, how it's going to set the pace for the industry that you're in. And so your job during the interview is to say, this is who we are and this is where we're going. And it needs to be an aspirational, very like over the top. This is something that it would take everything to go right for us to even come close to achieving that vision. But when you do, that gives people a sense that they're part of something that's really miraculous. Coca-Cola has their vision statement is to have a Coca-Cola product within 20 yards of every single person on planet Earth. Now, can I share with you, that is a bold vision. And so anybody who comes to work for Coca-Cola, they were like, man, I want that to become a reality. For some of us, we remember the times when John F. Kennedy was president. Do you remember when he said boldly, we're going to put a man on the moon by 1969? You know, that was such a bold vision. Nobody believed it would ever happen. And yet you walk into any facility of NASA, and whether you're talking to management or you're talking to the guy who is a janitor sweeping up the floor, they all would reply when you ask them this question, what is your job here? Every single person would respond, we're going to put a man on the moon. And so that's vision. That is getting everybody in the organization focused on the main vision of your company. Cast that when you're recruiting. And then number 4, look for the cultural fit. You know, not everybody is going to fit with your team. This is why I'm a big fan of 360-degree interviews and or reviews of your team. I believe it's very important to have good chemistry. Sometimes if you go and you look for a recruit and they check all the boxes, you know, they are meeting all the qualifications, educational and experience, and yet they are the kind of person who's going to really lock horns with some other members of your team. You know, think twice before you bring them on board. And that's why I think 360 interviews are great, because it allows your team to be another set of eyes and ears in that interview process. And then number 5, don't settle for less than the best. I'll get into this in the next slide, but the bottom line is most of us, and I've done it, okay? So I am there. I have filled a role that I just knew in my heart it was just not going to happen. It wasn't going to work out. But I needed a person, and that was my justification. But guess what? I spent the next 3 months deselecting that individual. And it was painful for them. It was painful for me, and it was painful for our team. So don't settle. Don't settle. And when you do those 5 things to recruit strategically, you get engaged employees with 51% lower turnover and 18% higher productivity. Now, I don't know about you, but I would love for my team to be 18% more productive. So that's number one, recruit strategically. That's how you build the team, okay? Number two, you assemble the team by matching those people to the correct role. Yeah, there's a book out that came out many, many years ago. It's called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he has a phenomenal quote in there that I want to share with you today. Leaders of companies that go from good to great start not with where, but with who. They start by getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. Now, I'm going to ask you, think about your team right now. Is there somebody on the team that doesn't need to be on the team? Maybe they need to be in another department. Maybe they need to be on some other team, but there's something that's just, it's a square peg, round hole situation. Maybe you first ought to ask, have we given this person the right training, the right support, the right coaching in order to be good, to be successful in their role? And if the answer to that is no, then guess what you as a leader have to do? You have to pour into that person. You have to mentor them up, get somebody to help coach them. Be the kind of leader that says, I'm not going to give up on you until at some level they're going to get frustrated. And when they do, it doesn't help you, doesn't help the team, and it certainly doesn't help them. So I always say, I never fire anybody. They kind of raise their hand and say, this just isn't working out. Okay, so the key here is to get the right people on the team. Now, Jimmy Johnson is a football coach. Back in the mid-90s, he started coaching the Dallas Cowboys. When he took on the team, they were 1-16. I mean, 1-15. They had 16 game season. And they were horrible. They were the worst team in the league. Over the next 2 to 3 drafts, he sat there, and his whole motive was to build up that team. Do you know 2 years later, Jimmy Johnson took the Dallas Cowboys to the Super Bowl and they won? And then they won again. And the reporter asked them after their second Super Bowl, he goes, how did you do it? How did you go from a 1-15 team just 2 years ago to 2 Super Bowls? And he said, very simple. I recruited winners. I drafted winners. I didn't say we need a tight end, and so therefore we're going to go and find the best tight end. I found the best players who were left on the board. I found guys who were always around the ball. They had a nose for the ball, and they knew how to win. In spite of everything else, they were winners. And my job was to get the team full of winners. And then once we got all these winners on the team, then guess what? That's when I can find the right position for them. And you'll find that in those teams, he had a lot of cornerbacks that became wide receivers, a lot of wide receivers who started playing on defense, a lot of tight ends who moved out to a slot position. And that's why, because he knew I have to match the people with the role. But first, I got to get the team of winners in place. And so assembling the team includes recruiting strategically and matching the people with the role. And then you've got to empower them. How do you empower them? It's all about communication. Most people who say, I really don't, I don't, get along well with my boss, or I don't respect my boss, a lot of it comes down to just a lack of communication. So let me encourage you to be a great communicator and do this on a regular basis. And I'm going to throw all these up, but it's so important for us to look at this. Vision, like I said, keep your team focused on the vision, because then every day they kind of know the long-term goal is to achieve that vision. What is mission then? If vision is that aspirational future that you're going to be realized as a team or as a company, mission is, why do we exist in the first place? Simon Sinek, famous leadership speaker, he actually says, begin with why. Why do we exist? Why are we doing business? Who are we? And that is really your mission. And so you think about the way in which, JFK said, we're going to put a man on the moon. They had a mission. And that mission was to put a man on the moon. What is your mission? Is it bold? Is it aggressive? Always be asking yourself that question. Thirdly, values. You want to instill values in your team. You want honesty. You want fairness. You want people to think that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I've said that a couple of times. I hope everybody knows it. Check your ego at the door. We're part of a team, and we're going to win and we're going to lose together, but we're a team. Okay. And that's no more important now than in the current environment, right? Where you're having to meet with your team oftentimes virtually. Communication is critical, especially during this time. Then you want to set goals for your team. They can be 3-year goals, 2-year goals, 1-year goals, whatever they are, but keep them in front of your team. They need to know what they're aiming at. It's kind of like taking a blindfolded archer and going, hit the target. Well, how can I do that if I can't see it? Okay. You have to get into a position of always putting in front of your team the goals, and they need to be SMART goals, right? They need to be specific. They need to be measurable. They need to be actionable. They need to be realistic, and they need to have a timetable attached to it. SMART, SMART goals. And then you have to make sure every person on your team knows what is expected of them. You want to find the number 2 reason people leave their jobs? Number 2 reason, I don't know what's expected of me. I don't know. Every day I go to work, I really don't know what I'm expected to do. If that is anybody on your team, let me encourage you, sit down with them and have that honest conversation with them. And then lastly, successes. Breeds success. Always, always, always communicate to your team times when you're winning, even small wins. Early wins in a project are critical to keep the momentum of that project going. So always be communicating successes. And I think you know this, but make sure you know this. This is so critical. You praise in public, you critique in private. Praise in public, critique in private. Okay? And make sure you do that. All right, number 4 way to assemble your team is to now guide them. There's really 3 big buckets of ways in which you interact with individual members on your team. The first one is direction. Go do this. In other words, this is what I am asking you to do. You do it. These are for less experienced employees who need direction specific from you in order to be successful in their role. I would argue that a lot of what you have to do as a leader, you shouldn't be directing too much. You want people who are self-starters, who don't need to be coached. This goes right back to recruitment. You want people who figure it out, okay? But sometimes you do need to provide that direction. Number 2, delegation. This is one of the most difficult transitions for new leaders. What do I mean by that? New leaders oftentimes come to the place where they feel like, I've been doing, and then I got promoted into leadership, and so I need to keep doing. Well, that's not true. That is not the way you want to transition into a leadership role. You actually want to spend more time thinking and strategizing and less time in actually doing. Does that make sense? It's a critical skill to develop, but it's a way in which you as a leader can then be thinking way beyond today, the here and now, and be delegating the here and now to your team. And then you can be driving forward so that you're always leading from front. And that's important. And then lastly, there's the collaboration. Let's do this. You and I, let's sit down. Let's work through this problem, this situation at the branch or at the, in the sales force or whatever. And just figure it out. I had an employee not too long ago who used to constantly ask me for validation. She would check in with me and ask me, am I doing the right thing here? And it got to a point where I felt like she wasn't going to take a step until I kind of sanctioned it or I gave her the go-ahead. And so I didn't wait for the performance review. Free tip for you, don't wait. As soon as you identify something, then go ahead and deal with it. And so I sat her down and I said, listen, you're a phenomenal employee. You do great work. And I am your biggest supporter. But I got to tell you, you've got to trust your instincts, okay? You've got to trust your instincts in making decisions. Listen, 9 times out of 10, you're going to make the right decision. And that 1 time out of 10, you're going to learn from it. So please trust your instincts. Don't always come back to me for validation. Believe me, when you mess up, let me know, but then come through and tell me, hey, I've got some learning to do. My hope for you as a leader is that you can have those honest conversations with your employees and truly empower them and guide them as they do their work. One final comment that I'll make here as you assemble your team is communication. We live in a world where communication, we have so many ways to communicate. Sometimes it gets confusing as to which communication method is best. I will give you the breakdown here, and then we'll walk through it just briefly. Verbal is me talking to you, okay, and or typing. So texting and emailing is a verbal communication. Notice that communication effectiveness is only 7% when it's just verbal, when it's just words. So texting and email, they have their place, but they are not the be-all, end-all. And a lot of times people resort to texting or emailing because it's less invasive, but I promise you it's less effective as well. So be thinking about what needs to be emailed or texted and what should not be. Number 2 is vocal. That includes your inflection, your pitch, the way, your tone. And so I can sit there and text you and say, hey, do you want to go golfing? And you can say, sure, S-U-R-E. And without any type of other punctuation, I could take that any number of ways. I could say, are they saying sure? Like, okay, I'll go if that's what you want me to do, or sure, I'm excited. Let's do it. Let's book a tea time. You see how texting or emailing fails to put that in, but vocal kind of captures that. If you said sure, I picked up on that inflection in your voice, but it's still not as important or as effective as visual. Facial expressions, body language, gestures, they all are the most effective ways in which we communicate. So I would argue that if you have a team that's remote or you don't see each other on a regular basis, make sure you're doing video calls as a minimum so that they can see you and you can see them. A little point, I think everybody's learned this over the last year, but a little tip. If you're meeting with a customer, you always want to show your face. Okay, you always want to put your face up there and you want to be in a position where your background is not distracting. Okay, that is important because eye contact and the ability to really engage somebody releases a chemical called dopamine in the brain, and it really kind of endears that person with you. So do that. And one thing I've had to learn, I'm a presenter, but one thing I've had to learn is to stare at that little light up there. And because that's the camera angle. Most of us are looking down, and so you see persons with their eyes downward. But when you're talking and communicating video during this pandemic and even after, make sure you look at that little light on your computer. Okay, that was free. Okay, so now let's go to phase 3. Phase 3 is building up. So you've developed yourself to be a great leader. You have those keys in place. Now you've assembled the team, you've recruited them, you've guided them, you've given them empowerment. And now the 3rd phase, you got to build them up. You got to create the dream team. And the way you do that is to build trust. How do you build trust? Well, I would argue that culture of trust is perhaps the foundational key to your success as a leader. Trust is really saying what you really mean and meaning what you really say. Doing what you say you're going to do and following through on it. When you do that over time, you create trust. It's the same way as if you sat down in a chair. You know, if you sit down in a chair, it's got 4 legs. It looks like any other chair. Other people have sat in it. You can trust that chair. You're placing your faith in that chair. In the same way, do you have that kind of a trust image with your team and with your company or your customers? Okay, trust. But trust is built over time, you see. And how do you build it over time? You have incidences called confidence builders. These are times when you do say what you are what you mean when you do what you tell others to do. And it's a way for you to create over time that confidence that you are the kind of leader that people want to follow. Okay. And then that flows from credibility. Well, what is credibility? And credibility is nothing more than, are you believable and reliable? Do you kind of know what you're talking about or not? Like if I walked into a group of people who were talking about, I don't know, like hunting, for example, would, if you've ever been hunting, then maybe you can engage in that conversation. But if you've never been hunting before, never picked up a gun, and then you come into the group and you start talking about all of your ideas about hunting, what would others think of you? They would look at you and go, yeah, I don't think he's very credible because he really doesn't know what he's talking about. And let me tell you, one of the most important lessons you can learn, especially as a new leader, is to be humble, to be willing to say, you know what, I don't know. But then to say, I'll find out, be that lifetime learner. So that's how you build credibility with your team. And you do that by competence, becoming really good at what you do. And that takes time, that takes practice, that takes effort. And you got to put that time and effort in order to become competent in what you're doing. You got to read, you've got to become a lifetime learner. And then you also have to have character. Character is that you are, character is basically who you are when nobody else is watching. Okay. Do you have integrity? Are you the kind of person that can be trusted? So my question to you is this: do your employees trust you? It is the foundational aspect of your leadership. If they don't, it'll take time to build it back or to build it up. But believe me, it is absolutely essential. Okay. So it begins with a culture of trust, but then you have to take time to develop your team. You're building this dream team. I'm reminded, and it's normally during these times that I show the 1980 hockey team, the US hockey team from the 1980 Olympics. It's been made into a movie called Miracle. Herb Brooks was the coach, and I oftentimes show the clip of the last 2 minutes of that game against the Russians where they did the impossible. They beat the pro-Russian team, who was unbeatable by everybody's anticipation. And yet this young amateur team of the US hockey team, they won that game. And it's about how Herb Brooks really developed his people. So I'm going to walk through the 7 aspects of how to develop your people. Number 1, you want to set the example. You want to be there early. You want to stay late. You want to do the hard work. You want to spend the time learning a new skill. You want to get better at what you do. You want to take input from others. You want to be the kind of employee to your team as you want your team to be for you. It's that simple. Do what you say you're going to do. Be that example. Number 2, reinforce the power of being a lifetime learner. I'm convinced that, every time I interview somebody, one of the first things I ask them is, what book are you reading? Or what blog are you following? And I learn a lot from a candidate for a job when they don't have an answer for that, okay? Because it tells me something about their capacity or their interest in learning new things. If you think that you've arrived, that you've learned everything there is to learn, can I just share with you, then you're going to stop growing. Okay. And I think that this is so critical to pour into your team, this idea that you are a lifetime learner. Number 3, help them conduct a personal SWOT analysis. SWOT literally just stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Become that leader that is building into your people by sitting them down and walking through the SWOT analysis with them. And then help them develop a career roadmap. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What's your purpose? What are you good at? What do you feel passionate about? Passion itself is not an end in itself, but it's kind of an outpouring of doing what you love to do, what you believe is how you're wired as a person to be. And so develop with your team a career roadmap. What does that tell them? It tells them that you trust them, that you have confidence in them, and that you expect for them to be around for quite a while. And that's a great message to send to your employees. Number 5, affirm outstanding work. Praise in public. Remember, every time they do something right, catch them. Catch them doing something right. And I promise you, it builds this energy where now all of a sudden they're doing things that you absolutely wouldn't have even asked them to do. That's what's called giving away the business, giving away the work, because you're affirming their outstanding work. They're going to find other ways to be outstanding. Number 6, take advantage of those teachable moments. For me, this is important. You know, it's at the end of the day, you have to be that person who is teachable, and they have to be teachable. Number 7, review progress. Review progress and set goals. So I'm running close on time here, so let me just work through this last few slides. 3 elements of a winning team culture are talent and skills, hard work, and belief. You got to believe. Your team needs to believe. Going back to that branch manager position, I will tell you, I had to get that group, and by the way, that was me at 27 who took on that branch manager role. And I had to take that team of 35 in that branch. And in a year and a half, we turned around that branch where we turned a profit for the first time in over 10 years. So that's how you build the team culture. Talent and skills, hard work, and belief. Your leadership axiom is this: leaders get back what they emulate and what they tolerate. Okay? What you tolerate, you gotta nip it in the bud if they're doing something that's not appropriate. Okay? Phase 4, build out. I'll just walk through this quickly and then we'll go. Sustain the winning pace. How do you do it? There's really 7 steps. You have to have that ownership. Remember I said ownership mindset, where they take on the project or they take on the assignment as if it's theirs. Number 2, stretch targets. Always be pushing them past what they think they can do. That's what any great coach does, or any great trainer does. They push you past your mark. Number 3, always connect them to the big picture. What is the big picture? It's the vision that you cast for your team. Number 4, engage. Engage your employees in actively seeing your project through or your team to that next level. And then share the successes. Always be willing to share the successes with the rest of the team. And then, of course, strategic accountability is really holding each other accountable. You know you've arrived as a leader. You know you've arrived as a leader when your own team is holding itself accountable without your involvement. And then lastly, milestone celebrations. Always be celebrating those milestones of your team. Focus on what's important. And these are, I mean, listen, the millennials and even the Z generation are coming into the workforce. These all matter to them: innovation, community and collaboration, social responsibility, and they want you to develop them, pour into them, invest in them, to train them to become great contributors to your team and to your company. And then lastly, global awareness. Lastly, I will say, you want to be a mentor. You want to find somebody to mentor, and you want to find somebody to mentor you. How do you do that? Number 1, you want to find somebody that you admire, that you respect, and who has really paved the way, and you want to emulate a lot of what they do. Number 2, you want to create a regular meeting schedule. Always be saying it's the 3rd Friday of every month or the 2nd Tuesday of every month. Whatever it is, block the time and make sure you stick to it. Number 3, identify areas where you need to grow. Maybe you're not as financially, you don't have as much acumen financially. Maybe that can be an area where your mentor can help you. Whatever it is, it could be conflict resolution. Those things, identify those, and then set a timeline. When you're mentoring or being mentored, keep it at 6 months, and then maybe re-up for another 6 months if you think it's been beneficial to both of you. But set a timeline. Otherwise, it'll lose the purpose behind it. Number 5, log your daily activities and decisions. The truth is, as a leader, a lot of times you make decisions that nobody thinks about. Because you're like doing it innately. It's inherent to what you are and what you've learned, but the person who's following you doesn't understand how you arrived at that decision. So log those. And then 6thly, work through the topics. And then finally, use MAUL. MAUL means model the behavior, assist them, watch, and then leave. Think about a meeting that you're running, okay? Think about you running the meeting, then you assisting them running the meeting, and then let them run the meeting, and then you leave and let them take over. And that's how you do it with mentoring. So with that, what did you learn today? Did you build within? Did you build around? Did you build up? And did you build out? So with that, I want to pause and just thank you for your time today and your participation in the UID. And I'll turn it over for some questions if there are some. Are there any questions?
Randy, it doesn't look like there are any questions.
Okay.
I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation and just let the group know that this concludes this session.
Thank you all very much.